Her name was Merit. She prayed to Isis every morning, kept her head down, and followed the rules. Then one day, her neighbor spotted her talking to a scribe near the market. That was all it took. By sundown, her hair was gone, her skin marked with sacred symbols that would never fade. Her crime? A whispered rumor. Her punishment? A ritual of public shame that would haunt her forever. While Merit's exact story doesn't appear in surviving papyri, records show this pattern repeated across many Egyptian communities. In ancient Egypt, a single rumor could trigger a ritual designed to erase a woman's identity, literally. And behind it all was a belief that went far beyond simple jealousy or gossip. In ancient Egypt, infidelity wasn't just a personal mistake, it was treated as a cosmic crime. Forget about private arguments or awkward family dinners. If a woman was suspected of cheating, the whole community saw it as a threat to the universe itself. The Egyptians had a concept called ma'at, which was the glue holding the entire universe together. It wasn't just about being a good person or following the rules, it was about keeping everything, seasons, crops, even the gods, in balance. When something went wrong, people looked for someone to blame, and women accused of infidelity were an easy target. Cheating wasn't just a scandal for the family, it was like throwing a stone into a still pond and watching the ripples spread everywhere. Temple records describe infidelity as a sin against the gods, not just a betrayal of a spouse. A disharmonious marriage could poison the community, and one misbehaving wife was thought to be able to bring on droughts or make the Nile forget to flood. Nobody wanted to risk that, so the punishments had to be harsh enough to scare everyone else into line. Legal texts from places like Deir el-Medina didn't pull any punches. Records warn that infidelity calls down divine wrath on a home. The language was dramatic. Scribes didn't just say, "she had an affair." They used terms closer to, "she unleashed chaos." It was as if a woman's mistake could summon disaster for everyone around her, and the consequences didn't stop with her. Her family could become targets of that same cosmic anger. What's even more lopsided is that men could sometimes get away with affairs, especially if they had money or status. But if a woman was accused, her reputation became a public safety issue. There's even evidence that court officials often fast-track punishments with little investigation. The goal wasn't to be fair, it was to restore balance as quickly as possible, whether the accusation was true or not. What if your neighbor's hint could mean ritual humiliation by nightfall? That's how fragile a woman's standing could be. There were no DNA tests or careful inquiries, just a glance, a rumor, and suddenly, a woman could be dragged into a ritual meant to cleanse the community. The punishments weren't just about pain, they were meant to be a warning. Every public shaving, every mark, every parade through the streets was a message. This is what happens when you threaten Ma'at. And the fallout didn't end with the ritual. A woman's name could be scratched off family tombs, erasing her from history and even the afterlife. Let's talk about what it actually meant to be pure in ancient Egypt. The ideal wife wasn't just loyal, she was supposed to be like a statue in a temple, silent, still, perfectly polished. She kept her head down and her actions predictable. Even a stray glance or a casual chat could start rumors. Purity wasn't just about avoiding affairs. Women had to perform it every day, always on display, with the tiniest slip threatening to wreck their reputation. Even prayer was risky. Women were expected to worship in groups or with their husbands. Praying alone, especially to a male god, looked suspicious. Temple scribes sometimes noted unaccompanied worship, and that was enough to brand a woman impure. Historical records mention ledgers where a woman's name might be quietly marked if she lingered in sacred areas without a male escort. No one needed proof she'd done anything wrong. Just being seen alone in the wrong place could put her under suspicion. Then came the rules about how to dress and act. Married women wore heavier linen that covered more skin, while unmarried girls could get away with lighter dresses. But if a wife's dress was too sheer or her jewelry too flashy, people noticed. A text warns against revealing attire that might distract men, so even fashion choices could turn into evidence of impurity. Conversation was another minefield. Women weren't supposed to chat with men outside their family unless their husbands were present. A scrap of papyrus complains about a woman who speaks with too many voices, probably because she dared to joke with male merchants at the market. Laughter, especially if it was too loud or too frequent, could be seen as a sign of trouble. None of this required hard evidence. A neighbor's suspicion, a servant's gossip, or even a priest's uneasy dream could trigger an investigation. The legal system didn't need facts, just someone willing to accuse. Court records show women punished for something as small as smiling like a cat near milk at a baker. That was enough for a sentence, often something public and humiliating like having their heads shaved. The higher your husband's status, the worse the scrutiny. A scribe's wife was watched more closely than a farmer's, and a priest's wife lived under a microscope. Some husbands even accused their wives first, just to get ahead of rumors and save their own reputations. One surviving letter from an official to his son spells it out: better to punish her needlessly than let the gossips feast. So purity wasn't about truth, it was about control. A woman could do everything right and still lose everything because of one rumor. Her life wasn't just lived, it was constantly audited. And when the accusation stuck, the punishment always started with the most visible part of her identity. In ancient Egypt, hair was more than just something you washed and braided. It was your status on display. Long, styled hair signaled rank. Think of it as the ancient version of showing off a luxury car. For the well-off, wigs could be costly status symbols scented with perfumed oils and styled to perfection. Even women with less money took pride in their natural hair, treating it as a badge of dignity. That's why, when punishment came, the first step was always the shears. Shaving a woman's head wasn't just about embarrassment, it was like tearing up her social ID in front of everyone she ever knew. The ritual was harsh and public. Guards would haul the accused to the temple steps or the center of the marketplace, where a priest waited with rough blades. There was no privacy, no gentle hands. Wall paintings from Deir el-Medina show attendants holding down the woman while the crowd gathered, turning the humiliation into a community event. The blades weren't delicate. These were the same types used for sacrifices, making it clear this was punishment, not a haircut. The priest would start at the hairline, working back in uneven strokes, leaving behind nicks and patches. Forget the neat buzz cuts you see today. This was messy, painful, and meant to degrade. The crowd's cheers turned humiliation into collective policing. People didn't just watch, they participated, making sure the message stuck. Some accounts say the shorn hair was disposed of ritually. Priestly texts sometimes mention shorn locks being burned as ritual refuse, while other sources suggest hair was buried under temple thresholds, forcing women to walk over the remains of their own dignity. Either way, the point was to make the punishment impossible to forget. The consequences didn't end at the temple steps. In a world where hair meant status, a bald woman dropped to the bottom of the social ladder overnight. She couldn't just cover up and move on. Legal texts banned punished women from wearing head coverings for months, making sure everyone saw their shame. Business contacts disappeared. Neighbors crossed the street. Records note communities ostracizing the families of the shorn, and even children could be shunned at school. Psychologically, the damage was deep. Letters from the period describe women feeling unrecognizable after punishment. One scrap from Cahoon has a woman writing to her sister, "When I touch my head at night, I weep. Mother would not know me now." Legal documents often stopped using the woman's name after the shaving, calling her only the shorn one or the bareheaded. It wasn't just a mark of guilt, it was a way to erase a person's identity altogether. Wealth could sometimes buy a way out. A rich woman might bribe officials to avoid the shearing, but most had no such luck. For the poor, there was no escape. Once the hair was gone, the punishment had only begun. The next step would leave a mark no one could ignore. Branding was the next step, a punishment that turned a private accusation into a permanent public label. Imagine being forced to carry a mark for life, not by choice, but because a priest decided you deserved it. In ancient Egypt, women accused of infidelity were branded with symbols that signaled chaos or impurity. These weren't random marks. They borrowed from sacred hieroglyphs, twisting them into warnings. The most common were zigzag lines or stylized animal forms, signs that, in temple art, meant disorder or spiritual pollution. Once burned into a woman's skin, these marks announced to everyone that she had broken the rules of Ma'at. The branding ritual was brutal. Priests heated bronze or copper rods in temple fires until they glowed, then pressed them to a woman's forehead or upper chest. There were no gentle hands, no attempts at comfort, just the chanting of purification spells and the hiss of metal against skin. Medical papyri talk about treating the aftermath with honey and linen, but infections were common. The scars never really faded. Even after years, they left raised, discolored patches that no clothing could fully hide. Every time a woman looked in the mirror, she saw the mark. Every stranger on the street knew her story without a word being spoken. The consequences went far beyond pain. These brands often barred women from sacred or public roles. A woman with a mark couldn't serve as a priestess, join funeral processions as a mourner, or even sell goods in the market. One temple roster from Karnak has a note beside a woman's name. Rejected bears the mark. She wasn't a thief or a violent criminal, just someone accused, sometimes without proof, of infidelity. The brand didn't just punish her, it isolated her from every part of daily life. Stigma followed everywhere. Letters from the time show families breaking apart under the weight of these accusations. One widow wrote that her grandchildren were kept away from her all because of the brand she carried. Neighbors avoided marked women, farmers refused to sell them food, and even close friends stopped visiting. The scar became a curse that outlasted any rumor. And the damage didn't stop with daily life. Burial rites, marriage prospects, and even hopes for the afterlife could vanish for a branded woman. Some funerary texts warned that such scars would be visible at the scales of judgment, making it clear that the shame was meant to follow her forever. A few women tried to claim their scars as divine signs, hoping to turn the mark into a symbol of favor instead of shame. But temple officials quickly shut down any talk like that. The system wanted the story to be clear. A branded woman was guilty, no matter what the truth might be. This wasn't just about punishing a single act, it was about making sure no one else dared step out of line. The brand was a warning, a permanent reminder of what could happen if you crossed the wrong line or angered the wrong person. And as bad as that was, it was only part of the ordeal. The next stage took the punishment out of the temple and put it on display for the entire town. The parade always started at dawn. Temple guards tied the accused woman's wrists to a palm rib pole with flax ropes, forcing her upright so she couldn't hide her face. Another rope around her waist kept her in place. Then the procession began, winding from the temple gates through the busiest streets and ending at the marketplace. Murals from sites like Beni Hassan show crowds hurling objects as the accused shuffled past, turning her shame into public entertainment. This was more than just humiliation. It followed a ritual script. Priestly manuals prescribed routes that passed through key community spots. Each stop symbolized something the woman was thought to have betrayed. The baker's quarter for nourishment, the scribe's hall for knowledge, the well for sisterhood. At each checkpoint, guards forced her to kneel while a priest demanded a confession. Many victims recited forced statements while bleeding, knowing that refusing could mean even harsher punishment later. The crowd didn't just watch, they were part of the spectacle. Temple staff often led the chants to get the crowd going, making sure the humiliation was loud and memorable. The final stop was always at water, a canal, the riverbank, or a public well. Guards dunked the woman 3 times while a priest declared her washed clean. But the ritual cleansing fooled no one. Letters from Deir el-Medina describe how after the walk, survivors became invisible. Market vendors ignored them. Children sang insult songs when they passed. One woman's will from Thebes begs her daughters, "Burn my body where they walked me, so my spirit forgets the way home." This system made sure the punishment stuck. Public shame wasn't just for the woman, it trained everyone else to fall in line. The crowd's anger, the forced confessions, the ritual route, all of it set the stage for what came next. Because for the priests, the real lesson wasn't finished until pain became a sacred act. Let's talk about the so-called cleansing ritual, which was less about forgiveness and more about making pain part of the lesson. The beatings weren't random acts of violence. They followed a strict pattern designed to put on a show for everyone watching. Priests used reeds dipped in symbolic mixtures, sometimes animal blood, sometimes dung, sometimes both, meant to purge spiritual impurity from the accused. The symbolism was thick. Blood stood for life, dung for decay, and together they were supposed to drive out whatever corruption she carried. The ritual started with the woman forced to kneel over a trough carved with chaos symbols. A priest would dip the reeds, raise them, and then begin the beating. There was no room for mercy. The strikes always landed on the back, never the face. Not because they cared, but because the back was considered the path of the soul. Priests intoned purification spells over each blow, making it clear this wasn't just a punishment, it was a ritual. Each hit left streaks of red and brown across her skin, the stench clinging long after the pain faded. Sometimes the crowd's mood decided if the punishment went on longer. Worker graffiti from Deir el Medina even jokes about one priest who always went overboard, earning himself a reputation for double purification. The reeds themselves came from marshes believed to be haunted by spirits, turning the beating into a kind of exorcism. The animal blood, often from rams sacred to Amun, drove home the point that this was about cosmic order, not just social rules. And the dung, usually from donkeys, animals linked to Seth, the god of disorder. Smearing her with it marked her as chaos itself. Survivors rarely got to tell their stories, but one letter from Cahoon mentions, "The stripes itch worse than the cut, and the smell stays even after washing." That was the idea. Make sure the shame stuck around. The stench made her a walking warning to everyone she passed. Even after the public spectacle, the stigma didn't fade. Neighbors kept their distance, and families sometimes refused to take her back. The scars and the smell worked together to make sure she would never forget, and neither would anyone else. Priests claimed this ritual restored balance, but the reality was much harsher for women than men. Men caught in similar scandals might pay a fine or offer a sacrifice. Women got the full ritual, the pain, and the public spectacle. The same reeds used to beat women were seen as too impure to use on men, as if the tools themselves absorbed her supposed chaos. These beatings often happened before major festivals when crowds would be at their largest. Temple logs show a spike in these rituals right before big celebrations, making sure everyone got the message. But if you thought the ritual ended there, you'd be wrong. For some women, the worst came after the pain, when the community decided she no longer belonged among people at all. Exile wasn't a quick punishment. It was a sentence that turned a woman into something less than human. The places chosen for banishment weren't random. Exile sites mirrored chaotic zones from Egyptian cosmology, the kinds of places that showed up in underworld stories as homes for monsters and lost souls. If you were cast out, you could end up at the edge of the desert, in the filthy stables behind a temple, or in the marshes thick with reeds and crocodiles. Each place was a physical reminder of what society thought you'd become: wild, dangerous, and untouchable. Life in exile meant living with animals in every sense. If you were sent to the stables, you slept in straw with donkeys and ate from the same troughs. If your exile was in the marshes, you scrounged for frogs, lizards, and whatever you could catch, always watching out for crocodiles. The desert edge was worse. Nothing but rocks, sand, and the constant threat of scorpions. Ancient letters and ostraca talk about exiles sharing bread with the bull's fleas or licking dew from stones just to survive. Guards patrolled to make sure no one snuck back, and if you tried, you'd get beaten like stray cattle. The animal symbolism wasn't subtle. Egyptians liked to match the type of exile to the supposed sin. Donkey stables for stubbornness, marshes for seduction, even abandoned lion enclosures for those accused of the worst offenses. Some records hint at life-threatening dangers in these lion cages, a not-so-subtle warning about what happens to the unclean. Most women broke quickly. There are heartbreaking pleas scratched onto pottery shards. One woman begging for water after months in the desert, only to be told the stones were kinder than her neighbors. A few exiles managed to survive by adapting, sometimes taking on animal-like habits or finding ways to eke out a living among the beasts. But for most, exile was a slow erasure. The system made sure no one wanted to help. If you gave food or shelter to an outcast, you'd end up cleaning the same stables or worse. Medical texts warned that even a shadow from an exile could bring madness or lice, so people kept their distance. Outcasts weren't just removed from society, they were treated like a disease. Men faced exile too, but their punishment sent them to mining camps or military outposts, places with rules, food, and at least some hope for a future. For women, exile meant being dumped with the garbage. Temple records from places like Karnak even list unclean women on the same transport lists as rotten figs and trash, making it clear where society thought they belonged. The message was brutal. You weren't just being punished, you were being erased. No trial, no second chances. The community watched as you faded from memory, and even your family learned to turn away. Some people thought this was the end of the story, but for the Egyptians, the worst fate wasn't what happened in life. It was what came after, when your very name could be stripped away forever. For the Egyptians, what happened after you died mattered just as much as your life. Your name wasn't just a label, it was your ticket to eternity. If no one spoke your name, you faded away, stuck in a kind of spiritual limbo. That's why the harshest punishment wasn't a beating or exile, it was being wiped out of memory, piece by piece, until it was like you'd never existed at all. Here's how the process worked. Families carved names and faces into tomb walls, hoping future generations would recite them during rituals. Without a name, there were no prayers, no offerings, and no hope for a peaceful afterlife. Temple records talk about workers assigned to erase every trace of a condemned woman. They scraped out her name from family lists, tombs, and public records, sometimes gouging out entire sections of stone just to make sure nothing was left behind. One bit of graffiti from the Valley of the Kings brags about removing a name so completely, not even ghosts could find it. The erasure followed a set routine. First, her name vanished from genealogical lists. Basically, she was deleted from her own family. Then workers defaced her image, usually starting with the mouth, so her spirit couldn't speak to the living anymore. Finally, any prayers or offerings dedicated to her got destroyed or scratched out. The Edfu Temple archives describe priests holding mock funerals, officially declaring the woman never born before smashing pottery with her name on it. Most families didn't fight back. They knew the rules. If you tried to save someone's memory, you risked your own place in the afterlife. Letters show relatives giving in to the pressure, even when it meant erasing a mother, sister, or daughter. One son wrote to his father, "Do what you must to her image. We cannot risk the afterlife for us all." Damaging one person's name was supposed to keep the rest of the family safe. This ritual was treated with the same seriousness as a real funeral. Without her name, a woman couldn't receive offerings or join the blessed dead. She was condemned to wander in darkness, with no one to remember her and no hope of rest. Ancient spells warned of nameless souls lost in the underworld, forgotten by the living and hunted by demons. Men sometimes faced this punishment too, but usually for crimes like treason or threatening the state. For women, it was most often tied to accusations of infidelity. And while men's families could sometimes pay to have a name restored, women almost never got that chance. Sometimes the cruelty went even further. In a Saqqara tomb, workers didn't just remove a woman's name, they replaced it with the mistake. In another case, a woman's image was relabeled one whose husband was patient. Even after erasure, they made sure the story of her supposed crime stuck around. Archaeologists today still find the scars of these rituals, blank spaces on offering lists, gouged out faces on tombs, and broken pottery where a name once was. It's a reminder that in this system, punishment didn't end with life. By robbing her of name and memory, they believed chaos itself would be contained. But the real chaos often started long before the chisels came out. Sometimes, all it took was a whisper or a well-timed accusation. Power decided everything in the Egyptian justice system, especially when it came to punishing women. The courtroom was mostly for appearances. By the time a woman stood accused of infidelity, her fate was usually sealed. Historical records show that adultery cases rarely focused on truth or fairness. Instead, they were tools for settling scores, shifting blame, or getting rid of inconvenient women. Scribes' journals and temple logs detail how accusations ranged from suspicious shadows to everyday interactions. Anything could be twisted into evidence if the right person wanted it. It didn't take much to get a conviction. Official records describe cases where women were condemned because of the way they poured beer, the look on their face, or even the direction their shadow fell at noon. These excuses might sound laughable now, but they worked when the accuser had the right connections. The more powerful your enemy, the less proof they needed. High-ranking men used accusations as shields. When a vizier was caught embezzling, his wife might suddenly face charges of adultery, conveniently distracting everyone from his crime. Temple archives are full of examples where women bore the punishment while men kept their status and income. Temple politics made things worse. Whenever a new high priest took over, accusations would fly, especially against older priestesses or singers. These purges weren't about morality. They were about opening up jobs for the new leader's relatives. One memo from the Karnak archives bluntly orders, "Remove the sinful singers," and sure enough, the next roster is full of new, younger names. It was a system built for turnover, not truth. Rumors, dreams, and petty feuds could all trigger charges. There are letters and notes from workers describing how a simple insult or a bad dream became grounds for punishment. No one needed real proof, just a story that fit the moment. The double standard was clear everywhere. Men caught in affairs paid fines, sometimes just a few jars of wine, while women faced public beatings, humiliation, or exile for far less. Ledgers show a mayor making amends with wine after being caught with a merchant's wife, while a female weaver was whipped for supposedly winking at a guard. Enslaved women had it even worse. With no family to defend them, they faced even fewer protections. Men controlled every step, from accusation to punishment. Women couldn't testify against their accusers, couldn't demand evidence, and had almost no way to defend themselves unless they had powerful male relatives willing to step in. Legal texts denied women full agency over their own stories. Trials weren't about justice, they were about reinforcing who held power and who didn't. All of this shows that trials were mere theater, women's bodies, names, and lives tools in power games. Ancient Egypt built its justice system to keep women afraid and obedient. When we talk about Merit's shaved head, the brands, or the beatings, we're not just describing punishment, we're describing a system that functioned to keep one half of society in line while the other reaped the benefits. History likes to remember pharaohs and pyramids, but the real story hides in the temple records, where a single accusation could erase a woman from existence. One accusation. That's all it took. If this shocked you, hit like and subscribe for more hidden histories of power gone wrong. And today, how many voices still go unheard because of rumors and power?